Hey everybody, thanks for joining me on a Saturday afternoon here. I did an episode a couple of days ago that maybe you saw about the NTSB's initial report on the MiG-23 mishap that occurred on August 13th during the Wings over Michigan air show. And at the end of that episode, I mentioned, as I do with any current events episode, that as the situation evolves and more information is available, I'll keep you updated. And so that happened. Last night, while I slept, or actually when I woke up this morning, one of my patrons, my Patreon patrons, made me aware of another channel episode that featured the pilot-rated observer, who was in the back of the MiG-23 as the guest. So we'll talk about that. But as people aggregate here, let me just go over a little channel admin. So first off, it was great to see everybody out at Tailhook. Thanks to everybody who came by. Here's what our booth looked like out there at the Nugget. That's actually the last time the Tailhook convention is going to be at the Nugget. They're moving next year to the GSR, which is a bigger resort, bigger casino. And as the staff of Hook said, they've outgrown the Nugget. The Nugget was there for them at a time when nobody else appeared to be willing to host them since 1995. So moving to GSR next year. But had a fantastic time. If you're a subscriber, maybe you've seen the 2 episodes that I've posted so far. The one with Magic Morris, one of my old RAG instructors during my early Tomcat days, that was an F-8 pilot in his early career, and the one with the Air Boss. Have some other episodes coming up. One is a guy from Elbit talking about the next generation helmet cueing systems. It's pretty impressive. So that one will be coming up early next week. And then I talked to an Air Force KC-135 pilot whose call sign is Sluggo, who actually did the planning for the tanker part of the initial invasion of Iraq. And he's got a lot of insights on how does a tanker plan come together. As a guy who's tanked a bunch off heavy tankers, it was really interesting to hear his side of it. So that'll be coming up. The other thing that's happening next week is we'll be sitting down with former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Mike Mullen, and talking about his life, his career, particularly focused on his time as the chairman. So look forward to that one. That'll be live probably late next week. So some good stuff coming up. The last thing to talk about before we get to the subject at hand today is we'll be down at the Oceana Air Show, September 15, 16, and 17, bringing down the Channel RV. And we'll be conducting some cool interviews on the flight line there, including one with Admiral Verissimo here, who is Air Lant, a 2-star. I actually met him out at Tailhook. So we'll be talking to him and the folks from the Rhino demo team and some the skippers of some of the H-60 squadrons. And we'll be covering the sights, the sounds of the air show. They have upwards of 340,000 people that attend that air show down there in Virginia Beach on Saturday and Sunday. So we'll be in place early morning on Friday, which is the practice show. And maybe we can even get some interviews with Blue Angels, particularly Amanda Lee, the first female jet pilot with the Blue Angels. There was a female Fat Albert pilot some years ago, but Amanda is the first female jet pilot. So we look forward to all of this. Also, we'll be attending the commander's reception at the O Club on Friday afternoon. And so in many ways, that O Club is a lot of history there, put it that way, back in the heyday of the F-14 presence at Oceana. So looking forward to all of that. All right, so let's get to the subject at hand. As always, I will try to pay attention to the comments as I'm presenting the information here. I'm focused on the assets. Remember, on these live streams, I'm the host and also the producer. and also I'll be the moderator of the comments. So we'll get to the comments towards the end. So let me just do the scene setter here. So as I mentioned, one of my patrons made me aware that the pilot rated observer, as listed in the initial investigation. So this is the thing I read a couple of days ago on my NTSB initial report. It's not very long. I'd say it's 600 words. And it is light on detail as described. So the pilot rated observer provides a bunch of detail from his point of view. Little asterisks on this that I will just say up front. So if you remember, I did 2 episodes about the same flat spin. The first one I did was with Slammer, and this was Tailhook 2 years ago, where he was talking about, he was in the back seat of an F-14 doing the pilot flip-flop hop, which is the Tactics 1 hop, where there's not a RIO in the back seat, there's actually a pilot. So it's pilot, and the guy in his front seat, Nasty Manazar, who's been on the channel a bunch, got the airplane into a flat spin, and they wound up having to eject. So I interviewed Slammer, and he gave his version. And then literally a year later, I interviewed Nasty, and he gave his version. Same event. And Nasty even comments that the versions are significantly different based on perception. So I entreat everybody, if you haven't seen those 2 episodes, go to my homepage. You can find them. Slammer's was 2 years ago, and as I said, Nasty's was last year. And they're different, right? So just say up front that perceptions in chaotic environments in the aviation environment can differ. So the guy in the back, the pilot rated observer, his name is Mark Ruff. So his background is C-17s. The guy in the front seat is Dan Filer. Dan Filer, his background is A-6s, the Intruder, carrier-based attack airplane. So that's sort of the pedigree that they bring. They had flown together a number of times before this hop at the Wings Over Michigan event. And then earlier in that day, they did the moto flight, or whatever they call it, the patriotic flyby with F-35s, which was kind of cool. So the airplane, by Mark's account, was flying well and doing great. So they manned up for which was the next to last event in the Wings Over Michigan air show. So let me just show you the footage. I'm sure you guys have seen this from 2 different points of view of the ejection. So let's just watch that real quick. So here's somebody's cell phone from the south edge of the lake. You see him punch out there. Two good shoots. And then here's another view from west of that last point of view, slow-mo. Two good shoots, and this camera actually tracks until they hit the ground near those apartment buildings. And we'll go over the map and some other things as we go along here. So 2 guys, Dan Files, Mark Ruff. Now, if you watch, well, let me show you the thumbnail of the episodes I'm referring to. So the first episode that has given some good, let's say, deep intel is this one on Scott Perdue's Flywire channel. I think this went live yesterday. MiG-23 ejection, know when to say when. And so, in the business, we talk about a get when you get a proprietary guest. I will say straight up, I'm surprised that Mark Ruff is willing to be on air so soon after the mishap. If this was an active duty squadron, there's no way that the guys involved in the mishap would be talking to YouTubers, the media, whatever. So we have this saying in fighter aviation: the first one to the dry erase board wins. And so in this case, it looks like the first one to the dry erase board is Mark Ruff. So I invite you to watch that episode on Scott Perdue's channel. It's really illustrative. It's kind of amazing the level of granular detail they go into. But again, this is one of the two guys' accounts at this point. The thing that struck me as you listen to Mark go through the explanation is he's kind of driving the show, meaning he's the guy who calls for afterburner during the banana pass, which was the final pass, the show pass they were doing when they're going about 350 knots. After that, he calls for burner, and he sees the throttle cycle into burner, doesn't feel the kick, as he says, monitors the gauges, watches the throttle cycle back and forth. So out of burner, all the way to the idle stops, I think, and then tries to light burner again, no joy. So what Mark says is the RPM starts to decay. And as I said in my first episode, unlike the amount of SA I had in the back of a Tomcat with respect to engine instruments, Mark Ruff in the back of this trainer version of the MiG-23 has all the gauges to have better SA. So he sees the RPM decay. There's no mention of what the EGT is, the exhaust gas temperature. So RPM decaying, EGT going up, that would be, a hung motor. And so again, Mark says he's the one who moved the wings. Now there's some confusion. I've heard anecdotally that the gauge in the front seat, the wing sweep gauge, was in-op. And so Mark had to monitor what the wing sweep actually was for files. Again, a lot of this is hearsay. But in the interview on the Flywire channel, Mark says that he's the guy who actually moved the wings forward to 16 degrees as the burner didn't light, and subsequent, the airspeed starts to decay. And so again, Mark, by his version, says he called for flaps. And so the flaps are moving. Scott Perdue asked him, okay, at this point, what is the airspeed? He says they were decreasing through 190 knots. And he says, what's the altitude? He says, we're about 700 feet and going downhill. So initially they traded airspeed for altitude, got a little bit of a mini zoom climb, and then they're committed. Okay. So Mark says he's feeling buffet, what they describe as elephants dancing on the wing. What I've heard about the MiG-23 is it has a really good, because you're on the knife's edge with that airplane, has a really good stall warning system. So nothing in the preliminary report or in Mark Ruff's recounting of the events mentions any stall warning, stick shaker, or lights, or oral tone, or anything. So there's no mention of the airplane giving an indication they actually were in the stall. So let me play you the ejection sequence as recounted by Mark Ruff, and then I'll give you some commentary on the backside.
I asked what's in front, and he said, apartments, I'm coming left, something to that effect. Starts to come left, and I said, we're going to have to get out. There was some silence. He might have said something, might have mumbled something. I'm not absolutely sure. And then we got back into the buffet, so the airplane is now rumbling. So the nose is up, but our flight path vector is coming down. And that's that angle of attack split. And that's when, and you feel that it's not a ground rush, but you're just aware that the things in your peripheral vision are getting higher.
They're coming up this way.
They're coming up this way.
Yeah.
And that's when I said, eject, eject, eject. And I grabbed and squeezed the pistol grips. You rotate at the elbows. And that's when the sequence started.
Okay, so Mark says he said eject, eject, eject. That's not mentioned in the preliminary report. Again, this is preliminary report. The other asterisk on the preliminary report, as Mark relays, is the NTSB sort of descended on them when they're in the hospital, right? And they were getting pain meds and they were in shock. So that's a suboptimum time, let's say, to start answering questions about what happened. I'm sure the NTSB wants to get the information while it's fresh, but in Mark's defense and in Files' defense, they're being asked questions when they're probably not 100%, let's say. So, and remember that Mark originally, as I pointed out in the last episode I did, he couldn't remember. He said they were compressed for time, needed to get out. When asked if he had pulled the ejection seat handles, he stated he could not specifically remember, but thinks he would have pulled them. But as you saw in that excerpt from Scott's channel, he definitely remembers curling two handles on the bottom handle, two loops, curled, pulled, and initiated ejection at what looks to be, by his recounting, 190 knots and 700 feet. So the other thing I want to show at this point, and this is actually off of Files' Facebook page. This was posted before the mishap. But here's a sort of cockpit view of the MiG-23 coming back from an air show. And what I would like you to note is how little visibility there is from the rear cockpit. So as we talk about SA and those sorts of things, you can see the guy peeking right there. I don't know if that's Mark or who we're looking at there. But Russian airplanes aren't, especially this gen Cold War airplanes, aren't known for their visibility. The canopy rails are like here. So just throw that out just for some context and some essay about the decisions made. The other thing you heard there is Mark asks Files what's in front of us, and Files responds, apartment buildings. And there's no more granular detail about how that may have affected the decision matrix. And again, I think there's some bias here in terms of who had SA, in terms of Ruff's recounting, and because he says there was silence and there's mumble. Again, there was a breakdown in crew coordination here for sure. And I'm not assigning blame, fault. I'm just observing the tone that Mark Ruff has in his recounting of the events here. Now, Juan Browne at the blancolirio channel, which is a fantastic channel, I love Juan's stuff, did his usual great takeaways. And I think some of his criticism was not directly pointed at me, but was about me. He mentions the court of public opinion. I think some of the beauty of YouTube is we have some fantastic channels that are focused on both civil and military aviation. There's sort of a renaissance right now of folks who come at it from all different ways. Everybody's got different pedigrees. As I said in my initial episode, I am a career Rio. And one thing Nasty mentioned during his mishap, his flat spin, is he wished he'd had a Rio with him, because Slammer, in his defense, was doing pilot stuff in the backseat instead of Rio stuff in the backseat. So in some ways, that's not additive in terms of in the heat of battle. What information are you providing? The other thing that Juan points out, and I agree with him on this, is because I mentioned that, okay, first thing I'm going to ask when I, feel, or I see the burner doesn't light, I feel the decel. And then again, I would, my burden or my druthers would be that the pilot's doing wings, flaps. Again, I'm not, let's assume that everything Mark is saying is true. We haven't heard, the other side of the story, as it were. So while he's doing that, what I mentioned is I would go for my PCL. No, first I'm asking him, do you got it? He says, yeah, give me a sec, or I got it. Okay. So I'm not initiating ejection at that time. I'm finding my PCL. So Juan points out there's no time for that. And he rightfully shows what the flame out checklist is. And this is actually, I scraped this from Scott Perdue's episode, but it's the same steps, but you can see there's a bunch of steps there. And these aren't committed to memory. So really at this point, you just need to know, okay, we don't have enough altitude to do a dead stick landing of a MiG-23. And I point to the airspeed required that Scott has highlighted here, 240 knots. High key is up at 17,000 feet. So this is like a space shuttle approach, right? And then you got to turn to base between 8.5 and 9,500 feet, turn to final between 6 and 7,000 feet. And your airspeed over the threshold has got to be between 200 and 250 knots. So already, again, by Mark's recounting, they are at 190 knots and decelerating and 700 rather feet and headed down. And when they dropped the flaps, that made their descent rate. They got lift, but now they're still coming downhill, although the airplane is in sort of a landing attitude. So, okay. The other thing that Juan points out is J.B. Browne's, who's the president of the National Test Pilot School. And you can see on his shirt there, he's an Experimental Test Pilot Association, real deal with significant MiG-23 experience. So he had a similar circumstance when he was flying a FAM hop, or part of the qual syllabus, ironically with Dan Files is what Juan guessed that hop was. So let me play you a short excerpt from his brief.
And as we're about 90 degrees into the turn, he tells me, hey, the engine's not responding to the throttle. It's okay, my airplane, I got it. Move the throttle. RPM just stays there. It's decayed down to about 80% on the core RPM. EGT is like 300 degrees. That's not a running thrust producing engine. And as we're about 90.
Okay, so let's just say they're not going to make the field based on what JB's talking about and the chart and that sort of thing. So again, these are iterative fact sets. First one based on all we knew to be true was, Mark Ruff asks Files, you got it, or are you ready to eject? And he says he's not ready to eject. He's not ready to eject and still troubleshooting the problem. Okay. And again, I stand by my assertion that if that's what the pilot says to me in that circumstance, then I'm not pulling the handle at that point for the reasons I stated in that episode. All right. But if you listen to the blancolirio episode and the Flywire episode, that airplane was not going to make runway 27. Okay, so now we get into a different matrix. So let me bring up, the other thing that Juan brings up in his episode is the ejection envelope, the safe ejection envelope. And I apologize, it's blurry. This is a small slide that's blown up to bigger. So here's the ejection sequence, if you will. Note altitude between 6.5 and 13,000 feet. right? And these guys are at 700 feet and airspeed 215 to 325 knots, and they're at 190 and decelling. The other fact that emerged in the chat was you got to be going. It's not a 0-0 seat. You got to be going at least 90 knots to have the canopies clear. Juan also points out that the sequence is whoever pulls the handle, front canopy goes, rear canopy goes, rear seat goes, front seat goes. So I'm not quite sure why that's the way, but that's how it goes down. So again, let's look at this sequence once again, just to see how that all happened. So again, rear seat, front seat, good shoots, good shoot there. So as somebody pointed out, Files didn't have a whole lot more time, right? You can see, let me run this back. Let's just watch here. Okay, good shoot for Mark Ruff, descent, good shoot for, so he's probably, what, 300 or 400 feet off the ground, and gets maybe one or two swings before they hit the ground. Okay, so let's take a look at, this is the rough flight path as Scott had this diagram on his episode. So they did the banana pass down runway 27. They're in a left-hand turn coming back for one more banana pass to a landing. As stated in the preliminary report, the wreckage path was 600 feet long and a heading of about 035. So this line isn't quite north enough. It looks like that's more like a 070 line. So you keep scribing this line until it was pointed more northward, which is important here in terms of the matrix at that point. Okay. So let's look at the Google Earth. So here is Willow Run Airport. And you can see about where it says Van Buren Park Beach there towards the bottom, and that lake. That's where the airplane was in a left-hand turn for its final banana pass. And then right when you get feet dry there, you see where it says Johnny's on the Lake Bar and Grill. So that cluster of houses just west of that, where it says Johnny's on the Lake, those are the apartments that the airplane crashed near. Fortunately, did not hit. And let's just say it right up. It's fantastic and divine providence that both guys got out safe and nobody on the ground was hurt. That is luck. Because when they shelled out of it, they had no idea where that airplane was going to go. All right, so let me get a closer view. All right, so you see where it says Van Buren Park Beach, Johnny's on the Lake Bar and Grill. So that cluster of apartments just south of I-94 is the apartment complex. Okay, so let's just allow that Mark, his memory is correct. The other thing to note that in the final report, they will have FAA data with airspeeds and altitudes. I'm assuming the airplane's transponder was working. So they have radar data that will either corroborate or counter the stats, the metrics that Mark put out during the episode that he just was on. But in any case, they were in a bad situation right there. You can tell from the videos, and let's go ahead and show the one. Let me run it back. Okay, so here we go. So that airplane is not going terribly fast when they punch out. And it's not terribly high. So if you tell me 190 and 700 feet, I'm thinking based on that's probably right. Okay. So if we look at this view here, okay, so not going to make the runway, pilot's still troubleshooting. What you will note in JB Brown's situation where he relates where he and maybe it was Files got the engine relit. But they started, as Juan points out, they got that started at 14,000 feet, not 700 feet. But there's always a chance that you can get it relit. But as Mark Ruff says, we're going to have some major like thrust, like right now, you know. As I said in my episode a couple of days ago, there's only one pilot in command. So I come at this as the guy backing the pilot up. And I think this is what I described as, too much essay. Too much essay can be a net negative, perhaps. And all we know so far is Mark Ruff's account and the NTSB early look that really is kind of vague. As you listen to Mark, there's a lot of holes in the NTSB report. So, and again, by Mark Ruff's assertion, sort of the tacit message I'm getting there is he had better essay and was ahead of the airplane in a way that perhaps, the pilot in command was not. But I think that's, again, we haven't heard from the pilot in command. So as a Rio that doesn't have controls in my cockpit, I'm backing him up with airspeeds and altitudes. I say, you got it. And he says, yeah, hold on. I'm not punching out. Feeling Buffett. Then maybe I say, I got it. Do you got it again? The trust piece has got to be that you trust that the guy in the front is going to do everything he can to save the airplane, not hazard the crew, and not hazard people on the ground. So those things are kind of all happening at the same time, right? So if he says I'm troubleshooting, and he's not a novice, right? This was his airplane. He had, I don't know exactly how many hours in the MiG-23, but it's got to be a lot. And so, if he's like, okay, I'm troubleshooting, knowing he knows his airspeed, he knows his altitude. And then you ask him anything in front of us, he says apartment buildings, and then you don't follow up with that. I'm like, well, hold it. Why don't you ask? Because that answer isn't good. So what I'm saying, based on this new and evolving situation, the only other part of the matrix allowing that airplane was not going to be able to land on the runway. Now, if you have 190 knots, the airplane's in slight buffet, and you could see it still flies for 5-10 seconds before it hits the ground. Could you have steered north of I-94? Because look at what's north of I-94, a lot of nothing, right? So is that what was in the pilot in command's mind in terms of, hold on, let's steer clear of these apartments that I just told you we're kind of aimed for? I don't know. So Bravo Zulu to Scott Perdue for the get. Bravo Zulu to my good friend Juan at Blancolirio for his usual insightful and accurate analysis of the situation. I have no quarrel with anything that he pointed out there. Again, I agree that there's not enough time to find a PCL, find engine stall, go through it. At that point, I'm airspeed, altitude. As you saw, I can't see a whole lot through my little peephole there in the MiG-23. Tomcat, I was sitting up high. I could see a lot of what was happening in the front cockpit, including the pilot's head moving around. And so Mark Ruff made the call, and all's well that ends well in terms of the outcome. So yes, I have no quarrel. And I think whatever's setting up between these two camps of should have ejected, should not have ejected, my intent isn't to pick sides here. It's just to observe and analyze and wonder if there was one more thing that could have been done, or that the pilot in command had in mind before shelling out. Again, as I said, and as I still submit, ejection, unless it's a cold cat shot or something where it's obvious it's time to get out of the airplane, meaning the airplane's coming apart or total hydraulic failure or whatever, needs to be a unanimous decision. And my assumption is that Files was doing everything he could in his professional, leveraging every bit of professional pilot experience he had to make sure that the outcome was good for everybody involved. And people are ascribing motives in terms of saving the airplane because he's the owner of the airplane, that sort of thing. I do not ascribe motives. I'm very familiar with military mishaps. I'm not terribly familiar with things that involve private airplanes. So again, I'm surprised that Mark Ruff went public. I don't know what is pending in terms of liability or insurance or whatever. I don't know. But there you go. That's what we know so far. And let me look at some comments now. So let me see if you guys have any pushback. So I feel like this investigation is going to be full of speculation, confusion, with both pilots saying different things. Perhaps you're right, TPP Etchen, but we haven't heard from the other pilot yet. So Colonel Brock says the aircraft was going down. They had zero choice but to punch out. I'm not sure that that's true. Perhaps it's true. I believe what Juan's analysis said in terms of they're out of the envelope. They weren't going to make the runway. But again, I just showed you the map. There were other places perhaps that the airplane could have landed, and they could maximize the potential that it wouldn't hit civilians. They were lucky. They were lucky. Again, this is the hand of God. If you don't believe in a higher power, take a look at how that turned out. Gunner says, I don't think they would make the airport. Maybe one of those woods. Well, what I'm saying is that the fields north of, there's a couple of industrial sites, but the fields north of I-94 would have been a preferable landing. Now, the other thing you could say is, okay, because I remember very well when an A6 launching out of Oceana, the pilot stalled and it plowed across the runway or across Oceana Boulevard and took out a civilian car with a lady who was pregnant in it. It was a very grisly mishap. So if you're aiming for, okay, I want to go past the apartment complex, also you need to land past I-94, right? Because that's a busy road. You don't want to take out any cars. So I'm Monday morning quarterbacking, right? Again, 2 good shoots, nobody hurt on the ground. That's a good outcome, right? TCC says NTSB preliminary reporting is missing so many details. They want to dig deeper before saying more, perhaps. I concur. All right, so we will get definitively airspeeds, altitudes, RPM readings. We'll get consensus between cockpits on who said what when and who had what essay at any given time. Right now, I'm not loving what that looks like in terms of who knew what, and I think there's a lot more to tell. Fint Smack, I'm not sure what that stands for, says Files got 1, maybe 2 swings in the chute. How much longer could they have waited to jump out? Well, as I said, not much longer. 5 to 10 seconds, let me just posit, what would the conversation be if the airplane had plowed into one of those apartment buildings and killed a number of civilians? We'd be talking completely different, a different set of discussion items here. So again, this channel is dedicated to full conversations about head work, situational awareness, that sort of thing. I don't have all the answers. I don't I've just posited what I believe based on my experience, just like Juan did based on his experience. He mentioned that he was a flight instructor for WIZOs. I have no idea what that syllabus looks like. All I know is how the Tomcat community behaved. I don't know how Strike Eagles or whatever else that those WIZOs fly in behave. And there was a big responsibility for co-pilot duties in the cockpit at all times. And part of it was in the F-14, there was very little redundancy between cockpits. These days, you have MFDs and everybody can bring up everything from everybody's cockpits, right? If I'm a WIZO and a Super Hornet, I can bring up all the engine gauges and everything else. In the Tomcat, as I mentioned, all I had was a fuel totalizer, unlike what's in Top Gun, the original one. He had all the tapes and everything. All I have is a totalizer. It's a single number, airspeed indicator, and I could see the stall warning lights over his shoulder, right? And they'd blink. So if we had a engine stall, I would know. But beyond that, if he's talking about EGT or RPM rollback or whatever, if we're at altitude, I'm reaching for the PCL to back him up. If we're not, I'm calling out airspeeds and altitudes and looking for a warm and fuzzy from him. And this is the X factor right now. And what Mark relates, in fact, let's watch his part of it again, just one more time, because I think this is an important part of it.
I asked what's in front, and he said, apartments, I'm coming left, something to that effect. Starts to come left, and I said, we're going to have to get out. There was some silence. He might have said something, might have mumbled something. I'm not absolutely sure. And then we got back into the buffet, so the airplane is now rumbling. So the nose is up, but our flight path vector is coming down. And that's that angle of attack split. And that's when, and you feel that it's not a ground rush, but you're just aware that the things in your peripheral vision are getting higher.
They're coming up this way.
They're coming up this way.
Yeah.
And that's when I said, eject, eject, eject. And I grabbed and squeezed the pistol grips. You rotate at the elbows. And that's when the sequence started.
Okay, so he says there was some silence. He might have mumbled something. I don't know. We'll see. I'm not loving that statement, but we'll find out, right? Let's check out some more comments here. Again, thank you for showing up on a Saturday here. This is great. Thanks, Rodney, for the super chat. Appreciate it. And I apologize if I'm mangling your handles here. Some of these are pretty complicated. Way too short, 07 grad. Says, my uncle's buddy has the corner apartment where it ended up. His brand new truck was demolished by the aircraft and the insurance won't cover it. So there's a story from the ground. Now, 07 grad, is your uncle going to sue for the cost of that truck? These are the sort of the devil in the details with the the insurance piece and the suit part. And again, this is why I'm surprised that Mark has gone public. Man, Bear, Pig, 1968. That no civilians were at risk. They were concerned about their safety. Only bad choice. That's something you could say, and that's not even really an opinion. That's that you listen to the TikTok and the pilot rated observer's own testimony, as it were, on Scott's channel. And that's kind of what it looks like. Kenneth Cripps says, the problem with the field landing is they would have been below the envelope of the ejection system. Roger that. That's exactly what I said and what Blancolirio Juan points out rightly. Yes, quite a number of tragic, Michael Davenport says, yes, quite a number of tragic crashes into populated areas. Air Force A-7D into the apartment, F-18 in San Diego. They had an F-18 at Oceana. The airplane Super Hornet hit the apartments just beyond runway 5. So yes, this happens. urban sprawl around military airfields is an issue. There's the Coopville out by Whidbey is now having some issues with Growler carrier landing practice because there's been urban growth around Coopville. We had it around Fentress, which is 11 DME south of Oceana when I was there. And if you look at the map, the overhead projection from, say, 1984 until 1998, which is my tenure of flying the Tomcat out of Oceana, it's completely different. There were dotted a few houses around Fentress, and now it's a continuous from the southern edge of Oceana all the way to Fentress. And those people who actually sign, I know I live in a jet area. You sign that at closing when you close on your house. But then they have civic action groups, and there's all kinds of people crying for, we need to change flight patterns. We need to get rid of these airplanes. That's what they're trying to do in Coopville. They're trying to get rid of that field, you know. And so we used to have this bumper sticker at Oceana. It was a picture of a MiG-21. And we said, hear the jet? Did it look like this? It's a MiG-21. And then the punchline was, then what are you complaining about? Right. So this is something that, you know, base COs deal with. You have to strike a balance with the city council and make sure that your neighbors are happy, and they need to appreciate that this job we do isn't easy and that sort of thing. But as Michael points out here, this has happened, you know, before. Don't worry about it. It says, honestly, just too hard to make an informed opinion right now without the flight data. Videos and cameras are deceiving, and altitude speed is hard to estimate from the videos. I concur, and that's why we're awaiting the final report. We'd also like to hear from the other guy in the airplane, in which I imagine we will eventually. But I agree. This is just supposition based on the initial official report, not just videos. But this is my first episode was based on this. And as I said, stay tuned, subscribe so that, if anything develops, I'll let you know. And I think these two developments, which is particularly the Flywire episode with Mark Ruff, is a significant development in terms of the knowns or the perceived. Again, I thought it was a fascinating conversation. Good on Scott for sitting down and enjoying Mark's trust to the degree that they were able to have that conversation. That's what makes YouTube awesome, right? What else we got here? Rainman says, remind me of the Hornet that hit the apartments in Virginia Beach in 2012. That's what I was talking about, right? Pilot had a rollback, sufficient altitude. It didn't have insufficient altitude to recover. Luckily, no one was hurt. Roger that, because it was a lot like this one in terms of where it landed between apartments and the damage that was done to vehicles, etc. Michael says at 700 feet with no afterburn, only 190 nets, airspeed dipping, there's not much you can do. Agreed. However, can you steer the airplane beyond north of I-94? That's my question. And is that what Files' intent was? I don't know. I'm sure we will find out in time. Again, nobody was hurt, so and the crew got out. Mark Ruff believed it was time to go. He pulled the handle, and they got, as you saw, Dan didn't get a whole bunch of swing time before he hit the ground, so they didn't have that much time left. They weren't going to make the runway in any case, but could they have kept the airplane and pointed it so it was going to crash north of I-94 in a more remote area? So Magna Pilota and Zoltan says the problem wasn't just altitude. Imagine if it stalls, snap rolls, and suddenly the ejection takes place sideways, not vertically up. Yeah, this is what Scott points out in his episode is this, they're talking about elephants dancing on the wing, right? And I know this from the Tomcat too. High angle of attack, doing a knife fight, one of these sort of, high AOA sort of fights, and then all of a sudden the airplane just goes whoop without any warning, right? And that's what you want your opponent to do. But if you're up at 25,000 feet, you have time to recover, or you have time for the bandit to roll in on you and shoot you. Again, there's no mention in the 600 words about stall warnings, but let's take Mark at his word that the airplane was in buffet. He claims that he was the guy that said to the front seat, okay, we need to drop the flaps. Flaps coming. And now elephants dancing on the wing. So if I'm in that situation, I'm not loving waiting very much longer. But again, this is the comms piece, right? So do you have knuckle knocker? Are you getting your knuckles wrapped by the stall indicator? Only one guy is flying the airplane. And as a Rio, again, I'm biased to trusting that guy until he says it's time to go. Now, would that have been too long? I don't know. Nobody knows. So that's what I'm saying about that part. Curtis Conway says the Guard's new F-15 two-seaters have the same controls in both seats. Wave of the future. Well, this is the wave of the past too, right? Air Force F-4s had sticks in both seats. Yeah, the F-15 has sticks. Paco, our favorite Wizzo, Strike Eagle Wizzo, has been on the channel a bunch of times. He's got a lot of stick time. So I think the Air Force made a choice that, okay, because we're doing round the world flights and, we're transiting transland, and the Navy's like, well, we do 1+30s, and so pilot fatigue isn't really an issue generally. So they elected to make my stick in the backseat controls the radar. It doesn't control the airplane. I don't know if, as we're talking about NJAD or NGAD, however you pronounce GIF, GIF, and FAXX, and if those are tandem cockpits, will there be a stick in the rear cockpit? I don't know if that's what's going to happen. Dan Kolstieg says, hopefully we can learn something from the situation, although I think crew communication could be better. Maybe the difference in experience and different views inside and outside played a big role. I think one of the things that is emerging, Dan, is crew coordination could have been better. But before I jump in with both feet on that opinion, I need to hear from the pilot in command and the final report. So the final report, there's follow-on interviews with NTSB, FAA, and then the NTSB mishap investigators will recover in the wreckage. I don't know if there's a black box or what telemetry or what they're going to be able to find out. What I know from my time at the Naval Safety Center is mishap investigators can find witness marks on gauges and angle of impact and on engines that will tell you a lot, even going through something that looks to be completely destroyed. So we'll know airspeed when the airplane hit, and we'll know the disposition of the fuel flow and the throttle and all of those things from the analysis of the wreckage. And so before we decide what the root cause was, let's wait for that final investigation. Did Ward say the AOA warning system was in-op as well? Hey, Z-Man, I didn't say that, and I have no indication that was the case. In fact, what Mark says is, he sees the AOA going up, so he has an AOA gauge in his cockpit as well, and so I imagine that was fully operational. Bug on my shoulder. Is there a bug on me? I have these stink bugs that sometimes cohabitate in the attic here. No, I think I'm good. Thanks. Don't be scared of bugs. They're all right. Is there a flight recorder? I don't know, Gunner. That's what I'm asking. I don't know. Maybe somebody knows. So we had an air show at the Huntington Beach Pier. You would not believe the extent of the involvement of the FAA. Nary a complaint here. Glad they did. Well, I think the FAA has oversight of all air shows, right? They moved, in fact, the air show here at the Naval Academy during commissioning week, they moved the zone when a landowner on the north side of the Severn River said, hey, I want to have my lawn party. And so before, he wasn't allowed to like use his full lawn because the show line was on his property. And he said, hey, forget it. So what happened is they moved the show line onto the Naval Academy. And so the primo spot to watch the Blues used to be Dewey Field. And then they took Dewey Field out of the equation and basically backed it up all the way to the academic buildings there that are south of Dewey Field. And then now the good spot to watch the Blues is on Hospital Point. So yes, the FAA is always involved. I'm sure they were involved here. We had a conversation during one of my patron happy hours last night about, how much does the FAA check airplanes? Well, I don't think they have the bandwidth or the manpower to like do a deep dive pre-flight of MiG-23, start the MiG-23 up, look at the maths in the book and go, okay, you got a wing sweep indicator that's not working. What are you going to do to mitigate that? I think their bias is they trust the airshow pilots and crews as consummate professionals. And so if you say my airplane's good to go, that's why they pay you to show up. That's what they believe to be your contract. Their contract is to make sure that there's security and porta potties and safety for all attendees and the civilians have a good time. So that's good to hear that they did their job at Huntington Beach. I'm going to say that the NTSB and the FAA do their job at every air show. And, the rules have changed along the way, just like everything's written in blood. NATABS is written in blood. Air show procedures are written in blood. And look at some of my mishap episodes from the early days of the channel. You can see the Blue Angels, plowing into show crowds and show lines, and the show lines were perpendicular to the crowds and that kind of thing. You remember the mishap that happened with the Italian. I think that happened in Germany, but the Italian demo team, hit the crowd. So as a function of that, those moves are prohibited now. You can't do towards the crowd crossing moves. Again, lessons are learned, and that's the good news. Michael DeSenic says, from what I know, the rear seat of the MiG-23 does not have a lot of visibility and could have made the decision. Roger that. And let me show this video again. This is from Files's Facebook page for the airplane. You can see the gauges, the ergonomics of Soviet era technology, not always intuitive. There's this PCL wedge there on the glare shield, the left quarter panel. And then as you look aft, there's the viz from the rear seat. Not awesome, right? To your point. Albert says seconds away from stalling. I agree. Yes, obviously so. But as you're doing the risk reward, so to that point, let's say, okay, let's go to the training aids, and I'll use our trusty MiG-29. I don't have a MiG-23. I have a MiG-21, but okay. So heavy stall, right? Here we are in our turn, left-hand turn. We're, as J.B. Brown said, we have a condition that's not producing thrust. Burner doesn't light, RPM hung up, EGT rising. Okay, so this airplane is not producing thrust. That doesn't mean it's not flying. It is flying. It is not producing thrust. So they do that mini convert airspeed to altitude, gets them a couple hundred feet, and then Mark calls for flaps coming. So now that's more drag. Yes, more lift, more drag. So coming downhill, slowing up, and feeling the buffet. So I'm saying they didn't, the ejection happened before they accounted for whether it would hit the apartments. And the exchange is what's in front of us, apartment buildings, 1 potato, 2 potato, eject, right? So not a whole lot of perceived concern for the fact the airplane was pointed at apartments coming from the back seat. Again, not my opinion, just what I'm interpreting from the account. But I'm saying, okay, let's see if we can't keep it airborne for a couple more seconds and float it over I-94, right? But heavy buffet. So if the airplane snap rolls off because it stalls and has that adverse proverse yaw, now you got a huge problem, right? Because now the airplane's going to hit, maybe a boat in the water. I mean, it would have landed in the lake at that point, or you saw that one cell phone footage where the guy's south of the lake, maybe the airplane rolls off and hits those houses on the south edge of the lake. Again, this is all conjecture. So John says, it's interesting that his story is changing. It first said you did not remember if he pulled the candles. I think you mean handles, but he may have. Now he says he did, and he called eject. Okay. As I said, the asterisk on that reality, as you're putting out here, is Mark says he was interviewed by the NTSB when he was in a pain meds haze and still in shock. So I will, let's grant him that. So Awafu and VR, thanks for the super chat. Would they even have had the hydraulics maneuver to the cleared flame out at 180 knots? Yeah. Yes. Hydraulics are working at that point. So I think the answer is yes. He didn't lose control of the airplane. He didn't say, hold it. No, I don't have steerability. He still had control of the airplane. And that's an important point. Sadish 8299 says, well, I'm more worried on the European countries throwing an attack on Russia. Is America planning a huge air attack with UK and Australia? Not that I'm aware of. And then we're talking about the bugs. If there's a bug, I didn't notice it. I sometimes get them here in the attic. I'm fine. All right, we're good. The jet didn't look bad in that left turn. I wonder what altitude drop was the cause. It seemed minimal, and seeing the ejections themselves push the aircraft down after each ejection. So from the ground, we can't tell a whole lot. Until Mark Ruff mentioned it, I didn't realize that they had put the flaps down. I thought the airplane was clean when they ejected. So, the guys in the airplane know things better than the folks on the ground in this case. So the only other information that we'll get that's valid with respect to that is the radar data that the NTSB should be able to pull. And we'll see that in the final report, I would imagine. All right, let's do a couple more questions and we'll call this a live stream. And again, thanks. We've got a lot of people who showed up today. I really do appreciate you guys showing up. In Purdue's vid, Mark Ruff said it was on the verge of stalling while in a bank. He'd likely have been the sole survivor. Pilot was trying his version of the impossible turn. Until we hear from the pilot, I don't know if that's true. The pilot was affected by get me home-itis, in my opinion, on saving the plane. The aircraft was outside the ejection envelope. According to the reports and video, the Rio, not a Rio, the pilot-rated observer had no choice but to punch out. That's what Mark Ruff is submitting. That's what Scott Perdue and Juan Browne agree with. What I'm agreeing to is based on all the information that is in those 2 episodes that the airplane was not going to make the field. But could they have stayed with it long enough to have the airplane miss any populated areas and still have a safe ejection? Looking at what I'm seeing, I think the answer is probably. But I'll await the final ruling, and I'll await the commentary from everybody who was in the airplane. All right, guys. Thank you for the great chat. as always, as soon as we hang up here, this will be an episode. So come on back and you can review the comments thread. I know I will. And you can add comments. It'll be a regular episode from that point forward. I will keep my eye on this episode as we go forward, and look forward to even more data and information on this one. Again, the bottom line here, and this is where we have absolute consensus on this mishap, is both aircrew survived safe ejections. I don't know if there's any other maladies as a function of neck and back. I don't know how those guys are doing with respect to those parts of, the after effects of an ejection, but they're alive. And again, foot stomper, most important part perhaps, is nobody on the ground was hurt. All right. So more on this as we find stuff out. So if you're not already a subscriber, become one so you don't miss anything. Thanks for the folks. I'm always pointing the wrong way. Thanks for the folks for the super chat. If you'd like to help support the channel, you can do a super thanks or become a patron at patreon.com/wardcarroll. And in the meantime, I look forward to talking to you again very soon.